Welcome, everybody. I think you can hear me, so okay, we're good. It's a thrill and honor to have Secretary Pollack and Rick and Charlie, all top thought leaders, with us this morning. Before we start, some of you may be tweeting, so we came up with a hashtag. We tried to put it up there. It's hashtag MASSRList, in case you are tweeting. A year ago, transportation was barely on the political radar screen. You may remember last fall's gubernatorial race. You didn't really hear a lot about the T or about transportation in general. It really wasn't one of those big issues that was getting hashed out. What a difference a year makes. The inspiration for today's event is how do we harness this fairly intense concern for transportation into something that resembles a vision. We were inspired also by a quote from one of our panelists made at an event in the early spring at a NAOP conference. She said, "I want to launch a conversation about the year 2040 and the transit investments that will make Boston and Greater Boston and the Commonwealth in 2040 the kind of place we all want to have our grandkids living in and that we feel good about handing over to the kids who are right now in second grade in a public school classroom somewhere." So to start off the questioning, and Christina mentioned, conjuring the future and even fantasy. So I want to start by asking each panelist, paint us a picture, the most accurate one you can imagine, of the Massachusetts transportation system in the year 2040. And let's start with you, Secretary Pollack.
So there are three things I hope for in the year 2040, two of which I hope that I have some control over, one of which I know I don't. So one of the things was mentioned by Christina in her opening, and that's truly 21st century transportation agencies. Nothing else matters if MassDOT and the T, and for that matter the registry, aren't the vehicles through which we can do the four things that the Commonwealth has to do to make the transportation system work. And those four things are serve our customers well, and that includes our transit customers as well as our drivers, maintain our assets, make investments that produce a high return on investment for the Commonwealth that we measure not just in terms of transportation, and plan and prioritize for the future. Those are the four things we do, and the agencies do that, and if the agencies can't do all four of those equally well, then nothing else matters. We won't have the system that we want in 2040. So that's obviously been a huge focus of the administration. The T stuff has been more visible. There's a lot also going on at the registry, and there's a lot going on at MassDOT as well. The second thing that we also have some control over is fixing the assets we have. And fixing the assets we have includes modernizing them. I'm not trying to get them back to 1950 condition, although in some cases that would be an improvement. While we're fixing the assets we have, we really do have an opportunity to modernize them. But you need to realize that the T alone, if we had to replace the assets the T currently owns, it would cost $25 billion. So it should not come as a surprise to anyone that we need to be spending between $450 million and $500 million a year just to keep the system from getting worse. And that the first year that we spent more than that, just on state of good repair, was last fiscal year, which we started halfway through to increase that. The last thing I want to say is we are starting that conversation about 2040. There's a series of flyers out at the registration desk for what we're calling capital conversations that will be taking place across the Commonwealth beginning next year. It's the first time that both MassDOT and the T have held a public conversation at the beginning of the capital planning process. Traditionally, we sort of put together a draft plan. It's a big list of projects, most of which were generated internally by the agencies, and then we say to people, what do you think? And it always feels like it's too late to actually influence what goes in the plan. So this time we're doing a completely open-ended kickoff. Tell us what your community needs. Don't worry about what mode it is. Don't worry about whether it's short, medium, or long term. Just come and talk to us, and then we will take your information. And if it doesn't belong in the 5-year capital plan, well, the good news is we're doing a statewide pedestrian plan, a statewide bicycle plan, a statewide rail plan, and a 25-year financially unconstrained plan for the T. So it probably fits in one of those. But let me tell you what I told a group of folks at Young Professionals for Transportation a couple weeks ago. When you sit in the year 2015 and you imagine that year 2040, whatever we imagine will be wrong. And the reason that we know we'll be wrong is because transportation is shaped by everything else that's going on, by the economy, by land use, by technology. So what I told them is, if in 1915, instead of 2015, in 1915 you had started a planning process for 1940, there were two huge debates going on in transportation. One was whether we should pave or not pave, with the advocates for paving being the people who rode bikes and the advocates for not paving the people who still used horses. And the second issue, given that per capita horse ownership was the driver of transportation policy in 1915, the second issue was dealing with horse waste, okay? By 1940, per capita car ownership, which was basically non-existent in 1915, had eclipsed per capita horse ownership, and the entire bicycle thing was a thing of the past. So we think of disruptive technologies today. We think about cell phones and smartphones and autonomous vehicles, but the car was the disruptive technology of a century ago, and people doing long-range planning in 1915 didn't know that yet, and we don't know yet. So that's why I focus on assets and agencies, because if we get those right, then the system will adapt to whatever it turns out to be, which we can't control.
Given that your prediction, Charlie, is going to be wrong,
One exception.
Predict anyway what you imagine 2040 will look like.
Well, I just first want to say that this is why we're lucky to have Secretary Pollack, because who else could tell us what the big issues were in 1915? This speaks to the kind of depth of knowledge she has on this topic. 2040 is a good year to look at, I think, because it's far enough out that you can say stuff that if it were closer, you might be thought of as being crazy. I think Secretary Pollack is absolutely right. You have to go at this. It's a critical process to go through, but to go through it realizing that things are going to change dramatically. I mean, one thing that jumps to mind is how many more people are going to be working from home in 2040. I mean, we just don't know. But what I would say in terms of a vision for transportation in Massachusetts in 2040, what I would like to see is a system that acts like a single system rather than a bunch of modes. Because if you're a transportation customer, you want to get where you want to go, or you want to get your goods to where they need to go, and you don't really need to think about roads versus buses versus trains. You just want to get it done. And I think this whole kind of portfolio of assets view of transportation is critical, and I think that we also have to look at it that way in terms of how we fund it. I've always been a big, this is one of the great things about not being in government. You can just sort of say these things. I've always been a big supporter of the ideas that the whole system should largely be funded from tolls. Anytime you're on a limited access highway in a major metropolitan area, I think the tolls would be low enough that you could actually do it without it being horribly burdensome. And I think you'd actually, for the first time, really have a way to fund all these systems rather than kind of making it up as we go along, which we've largely been doing for a long time. So that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see a system that is really focused, a really customer-focused system, because I think that the whole key here is that if we serve our customers well, and if the focus of the T is on customer service, I think that's the key to making revenues rise. That's the key to dealing with some of the budget issues that we have. And to me, customer service is simply another word for maintenance and maintaining an updated system. I would say in terms of building new stuff as we go forward, the big thing that I'm always on about that is that we really need to look at these, every opportunity and every potential every potential new project in terms of life cycle costs. What does it cost to build, operate, and maintain, not just what it costs to build, which is, I think, a problem that we've gotten into much in the past. And the other thing, another sort of thing that makes me crazy that I'd like to see change going forward has to do with the central subway and bus system. I think we need to get to the end of a hub and spoke kind of system where you can go wherever you want, but you've got to go through Park Street to get there. And I always use Longwood as the perfect example of that. You know, if you live in Dorchester, if you live in Roxbury, and you need to get there to work, we need to have a better system than one that requires you to go into downtown Boston and go back out.
Rick, paint us a picture. It doesn't have to be a pretty picture either, 2040.
Well, first, Judge, thank you for inviting me and all of us today. It's a pleasure to be here with Secretary Pollack and Charlie. Great colleagues, great friends, and incredible leaders. A couple of things. First of all, for the record, Charlie Chieppo said he wants to look beyond the hub and spoke system, and that means maybe a project that's been near and dear to my heart since I was a young lad commissioner, which is the Urban Ring Project.
Mine too, I agree.
Thank you, Charlie. And I remember a good academic and one-time activist and advocate that looked at that project as a viable and important investment in the Commonwealth. And I still see it as an important and long-term part of our vision. And I wanted to pick up on that idea because the idea is that we can't just be thinking about today. And that's why, George, I'm glad you asked about 25 years from now. So let me just give you a few examples of where predictive thinking has actually worked out for us. So we all, especially a number of us in the room, are big students of the Boston Transportation Planning Review. And that happened in the 1970s. And there were some winners, and of course, like anything else, when we're trying to predict the future, some losers. But overall, it was an incredible effort by then Governor Sargent and Alan Ashlew and a team of wonderful professionals that really sat back and said, what's the future of the Boston metropolitan area going to be? And I think that's fundamentally where we are now, is where do we want the metropolitan Boston area and the surrounding areas around metropolitan Boston, and frankly, points north, west, and south of metropolitan Boston and its relationship to our economy. What do we want to do to make that really vibrant? What do we want to do to make that economy really be successful? And I'll tell you, from 1970 to 2007, an incredible amount of investment took place to make that plan a reality. In the transportation system that actually one of the, thank God, one of the most resilient economies in the country got to rely on is resting on the laurels of that plan in the 1970s. We built a good amount of what was in that plan, and thank God we did. From 1997 to 2007, if you look at the spider map of the MBTA in 1997 and compare it to 2007, you'd see an incredible amount of expanded and increased capacity in our transit system that connected to parts of the region, economic centers, that connected jobs to people and people to jobs. And we need to start thinking in the same kind of way. First of all, I'm going to use my restaurant analogy. I can't help myself. We have the transportation system has a lot of problems. My restaurant has a lot of problems. The kitchen staff really stinks, but there's a leaky roof. And for some reason, people are starving and there's a line at the door. We can't just focus on the kitchen staff. We need to focus on the kitchen staff, but just the kitchen staff alone, making the system right is our obligation. That is an essential part of what we need to do. And I commend everybody that's focused on getting that done, and I'd like to help make sure that that happens. But in the meantime, we can't spend basically a third of what we need to spend to fix the roof. We have a $7.2 billion city good repair problem. 20 years from now, are we going to still have a $7.2 billion city good repair problem because we're not spending at the rate to buy down that maintenance problem? By the way, if you add inflation to that number, or by the way, if you don't spend at the rate to spend on that number's going to get much bigger. Do we want our kids to actually be looking at a much bigger number? In the meantime, I said people were starving. They want to come in and get some food. Demand is escalating relative to certain economic centers in this region. And we can't find a way to meet that demand. So is the spider map going to be the same 25 years from now? Because we can't afford to do it, or we haven't the vision to do it? We need a statewide transportation plan. I commend Secretary Pollack because she actually is getting into it. The idea of looking at a constrained transportation plan, honestly, is one of those great steps forward by the DOT and the Secretary Pollack and Governor Baker. The idea of fixing the system, getting the control board in place, getting things in place to actually work, have the rail work better, have our transit system work better, have our highway system work better. By the way, we're not even talking about the highway state of repair number, right? 20 years from now, huge number, just the central highway system, the metropolitan highway system. I still think we're in the $1 billion state of good repair category. So anyway, we need to fix the system. Hopefully we'll have a financial strategy, a statewide transportation finance strategy that fixes the system. Hopefully we'll have an agency that's well operating with human professional capacity to get it done. And we'll also be able to make incremental investments in increasing capacity and expanding the system where we think it's necessary.
Well, it seems like the elephant in the room then is political will. Let's take the urban ring, for example. That's been out there 25, 30 years, right? Maybe more. It's gone pretty much nowhere. And the reason I would imagine is because policymakers and elected officials sense that there isn't a public appetite for it. So how do you get critical mass of people excited about the idea of making that kind of investment, even an urban ring investment? And for that question, because it's a political question, we'll start with Secretary Pollack.
So we want to say a couple things. The first is that we're not just focused on the kitchen staff, right? So I said we do 4 things, and we actually do 4 of them simultaneously, and one is invest. And so this year we'll put $3 billion into DOT and MBTA assets. That's the biggest spend. That's bigger than the Big Dig, and quite frankly, it's more statewide than the Big Dig spend was. And honestly, if I had more than $3 billion to spend this year, I don't know if I could get it out the door, and it will be a lift to spend all $3 billion well. You can always spend money, but to spend all $3 billion well. And next year, we can spend more than $3 billion, and we don't need more revenue. So the idea that it's just political will or it's just revenue is simply not true. First, we have to build the capacity to get the money out the door. And that capacity comes in sort of pieces, and we're working on all of those pieces. So one piece is, quite frankly, we need a bigger universe of potential investments. And I say investments, not projects, and I do not think that we should be sitting in this room talking about what the next big project should be. Should it be the urban ring, or the north-south rail link, or the South Station expansion, or the Alston interchange plus train station plus the MUs plus bike paths? We need to be thinking in terms of investments. The reason that investments is not a euphemism for project is that we know 3 things about investing, right? One, and you know this if you have a kid in college like I do, or if you desperately want to retire someday, right? One is you have to set aside the money you invest regularly and steadily, right? That's why we all take payroll deductions for our investments. You don't go from like this amount to this amount overnight unless you win the lottery. So we need to do that in Massachusetts. We need to look at the Commonwealth Transportation Fund that we have, and we need to say it is for investing in capital projects, not fixing the T's operating deficit, not borrowing money to do any other one-off needs. It's there so that we can issue bonds, so that we can make investments. And we can grow those investments. We can spend more than $3 billion a year if that's the will, but we're not going to go from $3 billion to $5 billion overnight, and I don't know if we could ever spend $5 billion a year well. So we should be realistic. The second thing we know about investments is they should be diversified. You don't put all your investments in one pot. In transportation, you don't put them all in one mode. You don't put them all in one community. The BTPR was great for Boston. Boston and Cambridge were a basket case. Public money changed that. Now, Boston and Cambridge are thriving, but the rest of the Commonwealth is lagging. And so when we make our investments and we think about a diversified portfolio, we both have to ask the question, what can thriving, prosperous communities and businesses in Boston and Cambridge do to help make additional investments, and how can we make sure that we're making 100% public investments outside that thriving urban core to serve the entire Commonwealth? And the last thing we know about investments is good investments produce a return on investment. And in transportation, we sometimes confuse the the reason we invest. We do not invest to move people from one place to another. We invest to create a prosperous economy, thriving communities, a better quality of life, a better environment. That's why at the end of June, DOT sent over to the legislature a set of project selection criteria. So once we finish those capital conversations, and all of you and folks from across the Commonwealth give us great ideas for new investments, we now have a way to screen those investments, not just as transportation investments, but what will they do for the economy? What will they do for sustainability? Will they leverage additional federal or private or municipal money? And then, and only then, will we actually know which investments to make. So I'm not going to answer the question about the urban ring, because I honestly, you're talking about someone who started working in the urban ring in 1985, okay? Because honestly, I think that the time has come to set aside the menu of legacy projects that have been kicking around for 40 years in this state and be open to the possibility that we should have a completely different portfolio of transportation investments. I don't know what they are. I have set in motion a process for figuring out what they are with the project selection criteria, with the new program for mass transportation at the T, with these capital conversations. And I personally intend to remain completely open-minded about which investments we should make.
And what if in another 15 years we still don't have an urban ring, and we're on a panel talking about it? I mean, would that be because?
If it's because instead we decided to make a series of investments in the gateway cities, or expand South Station, or get the number of structurally deficient bridges down to 0, or create 100 walkable community centers in our communities, I will not shed one tear. If it's because we accomplished nothing in those 15 years, shame on all of us.
Yeah. So first of all, we got to get the bridges fixed. No question about it. And by the way, over 50% of the bridges are structurally deficient in the state, and we're making incremental progress to bringing that number down. But again, the financial picture relative to getting those bridges fixed is short. We don't have enough money to fix the bridges. Now, I'm okay with the fact that we need to spend the money that we have well, and I'm okay that we need to get the people that are responsible for designing and constructing projects in a place where they can actually get money up the door and spend it effectively. So the product is really great when it's done. But that doesn't mean we don't look at the idea of actually fixing all of our bridges and actually coming up with a financial strategy to fix those bridges 15 years from now. And it also doesn't mean we got 8 million square feet of development in the Longwood Medical Area that still is ahead of us. Okay? Anybody try to get to the Longwood Medical Area? It's not pretty. So if that 8 million square feet is still ahead of us and our economy wants to grow, and we're competing in this country for an economy and job growth, and I think job growth is an important political strategy, an important economic strategy for the state, then we have to find a way to get those people to those jobs. That's a very basic, fundamental responsibility of both the public sector, the private sector, and the public at large. Meaning we have to figure out a way to solve these problems. They're in front of us. That doesn't mean we shouldn't spend money in the gateway cities. Absolutely, gateway cities are tremendous economic centers for us. What are the economic strategies and infrastructure strategies, landing strategies to make those places successful? I'm excited about that future opportunity. And Secretary Pollack is laying out an opportunity for us to have a conversation. But it's not good enough just to be talking about our current assets and being able to spend the money to fix those assets. We actually have to be able to be ready to look at a vision that includes a landing strategy, an economic strategy, an environmental strategy. For example, we got a climate change and resiliency set of issues here where our infrastructure is going to be impacted. Where's the funding for that? What's the strategy for that? How are we going to take care of making sure that those things are in place over the next 5 to 10 years? We're not even talking about that. Hopefully a plan will be coming out soon that will actually disclose those issues and actually put on the table the fact that we need to address those things. So everybody that's talked about this issue, even the recent commission that looked at the T, said we need reform and revenue. And if you look at timetables, revenues have long timetables. Having a discussion about money is not a short conversation. It's hard. And if you don't put it on the table soon, then when are we going to talk about it? The other thing that's hard is building human resource capacity and building an organization that can actually do what we're all saying it should do. That takes time too. And that, I know, the big administration is focused on, which I'm greatly appreciative.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's a segue for you, Charlie.
Yeah, well, I would say a couple of things. The first thing I would say is that just on a different note here, it's not a surprise, given that you put a couple of battalions on this panel, that it was the over/under was about 5 minutes before we began the restaurant analogies. But reminds me of my family reunions on that. But I would echo everything that Secretary Pollack just said, and this is good because this gets to the fundamental disagreements that Rick and I always have. What I would say in my role as the skunk at the garden party here is that, actions have consequences. And the MBTA has, for now 30 years, been the fastest growing major transit agency in the United States. And we did that with absolutely no way to pay for it. And so to sort of say that we're just going to sort of start anew and we're going to fix everything, and we're going to build all these new things, and there's going to be sort of endless amounts of money. It just doesn't work. I mean, we have gotten ourselves into an immense hole, and the first priority needs to be that we need to get out of that hole. And so that may not be perfect. It may not be sort of the world that any of us want to be living in, but that is the world that we do live in. Related to that, as I said, at the opening, certainly over the long term, I see a system that invests a lot more money than what we have now. But related to that are two things. I think that we have seen a number of reports that have come out, including the governor's panel, that showed that at least as of 6 months ago, trying to put a lot of new money in the MBTA was sort of like trying to pour water into a glass that didn't have a bottom. And I think we're starting to do things right now, and I credit Secretary Pollack, we are doing things right now that are starting to change that. But I think that has to change before we can dramatically increase the amount of money that is going into it. And secondly, I would say that regardless of what any of us think, it has to be that way because the public is simply not going to buy it. Until we can show that the MBTA is a functioning organization that can handle the new money and use it well. So I think that I think that while we all want to get to the same place, I think that there are certain realities here that we have to face in terms of that limit how we get there. And I guess the other thing that I would mention, being that I'm sort of involved in a lot of these different policy areas, is that as much as most of us in this room would like to see a lot more money go into transportation, that right now there's a hearing going on at the State House with a bunch of people who are talking about how a lot more money needs to go into education, and I'm sure somewhere else in Massachusetts right now is another gathering like this where everybody's talking about how dramatically underfunded healthcare is. We live in a world of scarce resources, and we're limited by how much citizens are willing to pay. And so, given those realities, we have to make some very difficult decisions.
Can I weigh in on this?
Absolutely.
Revenue? Okay, so I think that people should not focus on revenue. What you should focus on is how much do you think we should be investing a year. If you don't think we should be investing, say you think we should be investing $4 billion instead of $3 billion. Before you go after revenue, you need to ask the following question. Do we need more revenue in order to invest $3.5 billion or $4 billion a year? So let me tell you, my strategy right now is I have a 4-part strategy for increasing our annual spend on capital with the revenue that's already flowing into the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. And we should have that conversation, and hopefully after the capital conversations and the plans, if it turns out even that's not enough, that's a different discussion. But just so that people understand that revenue, we just put enough revenue into the Commonwealth Transportation Fund in 2013. The purpose of that legislation was to make sure that there was $600 million a year in new revenue in the Commonwealth Transportation Fund every year. That's what it achieved. Another $3 billion. In many states, $600 million a year on top of the additional spend would be considered real money. Okay? So, what is the strategy for leveraging that money that's already available? Okay, so the first is everyone has been focusing on giving the T money for operations while cannibalizing the money in the Commonwealth Transportation Fund that we could be using for capital. The T needs fiscal discipline, and it hasn't had any because it's treated the Commonwealth Transportation Fund like an open checkbook. We have withdrawn $400 million from the Commonwealth Transportation Fund in the last 3 years to cover operating deficits of the T. Had we bonded against that $400 million, we would have issued $3 billion in additional bonds without one additional penny of revenue. So one of our goals is to reduce the rate of withdrawals from the Commonwealth Transportation Fund to cover the T's operating budgets so we can bond against those. Those are special obligation transit bonds. They're already authorized by the legislature. There's a long list of projects we can spend them on, and they do not count towards the bond cap, so we can overspend the bond cap on transportation, but only if we spend the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. That's strategy number one. Strategy number two, which we already talked about, is to deliver the projects we do on time and on budget so that we have more money to spend on other ones. Strategy number three is find non-Commonwealth resources. The idea that we're going to do 100% of what we need to do with 100% state money is not good strategy. There is federal money, including federal discretionary money, that we need to chase harder. There is private money. There's municipal money. There's lots of other sources of money. The primary source will and should continue to be state money, but we need to look at leverage. Can we spend 90 cents on a dollar of state money and get 10 cents from somewhere else? And then the fourth strategy, which is the one that no one ever wants to talk about, is what I call the MSI strategy. No stupid investments. Okay? Every $100 million we spend on the wrong project is $100 million we could have spent on the right project. So when I say I'm serious about using project selection criteria and doing the projects that are the right projects and not doing the ones that are wrong, not doing stupid projects generates money to do smart projects.
What are some of the examples of some stupid projects?
Well, we're going to find out because we're going to put them all through the sieve. But I have to say that if you think that every project that is currently sitting on a long-range plan by an MPO or by the state in Massachusetts actually produces the kind of return on investment that we could produce with other investments, I beg to differ because it's not how we chose them. The odds that they're all right is zero because the process of deciding which ones got put on those lists was not a good process. When Pennsylvania underwent a multi-year process in North Carolina and all these other states where they basically do zero-based capital budgeting, they change 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 projects. It's not that every project is the wrong one, but if a quarter of them we would spend on different projects, and we're spending $3 billion a year, that's hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on the right project. So the point is that we have a strategy for increasing capital investment. Not having a revenue strategy does not mean that we are only going to spend what we're currently spending. And once we use our strategies, if people still think we need more revenue to get to the capital spend we need, then that's another conversation. But we don't need to start with revenue because we got $600 million a year in revenue into the CTF in 2013.
And I just would add that, of course, the poster child for the bad projects is Greenbush.
Let others pick it.
Just to pick up on that, so clearly the money that we have, again, can and should be looked at as an investment and needs to be looked at as how well we spend that investment and spending it in terms of getting the maximum use of those dollars. You know, as soon as Secretary Pollack took office, she started to look and really put like good, hard focus on the project selection criteria. Incredibly important. Getting the right return on investment on the investments that we're making, essential. So that is one of those things in the multi-pronged strategy that I absolutely support. Together with looking at other sources of money, I totally support Secretary Pollack in trying to turn over every stone. And I actually, and the Secretary knows this, I'm even willing to look at what the private sector's role should be relative to other sources of funding. All that absolutely has to be on the table. We got a 3-cent increase in the gas tax. Under the best circumstance, that's $90 million a year. That was in 2013. Then we lost the notion of inflating the gas tax. We estimated that we lost about $1 billion over 10 years in that new revenue source. Now, if we do math, then someday we have to get to that revenue conversation. I just want to get to it sooner versus later. I don't question the good things that we're doing relative to making sure we spend the money that we have well. I just really want to face the honest-to-God facts that we have to find additional sources of revenue and look at transportation-related fees and taxes and other public-private partnerships to find ways to solve the problems that we know we have. As I mentioned to you before, there's a $7.2 billion steady good repair problem that was estimated recently by the Baker administration. That doesn't include inflation. That doesn't include, if we don't spend at the rate to spend it down, what that new number is going to be. The annual spend, the annual investment that Secretary Pollack is talking about, does not spend down at that rate. There's no discussion yet of addressing the stated good repair problem in its entirety, because we need additional funding to do that. As I mentioned to you before, we have a statewide transportation system. Now, if we include the highway and bridge system, the funny thing is that in 2007, there was a Finance Commission report that said that we had a $20 billion gap in the state of the repair system-wide. I'm not so sure. We've made some investments. We've spent some money. We may be spent and should be spending the increment more that we have. Well, but we're still tracking somewhere in that number. Doesn't make that much sense to me. The other thing that's going on is that the T predicted recently in terms of the control board a $400 million deficit. Now, I know that good management and good efficiencies will come to the T. And I know that the control board and Governor Baker and Stephanie Pollack and the rest of the team will really focus on that. But there is no way that we're going to be able to reform our way out of those types of financial challenges. So why are we being honest about the fact that we need to address the incremental strategy to start looking at how we're going to invest in this infrastructure problem and have an honest conversation with the public about how we should do it?
I think really this comes down, in a sense, to a timing issue. And I guess my sense of it is that going to the public right now in the wake of last winter and all the things that we've seen and saying that we need more money is not going to end well. And I think that we need to show some progress before we get to that point. And then I think going forward, I think it becomes critical. And again, this is something that I know that that Secretary Pollack is doing, is this idea of performance measures and performance measures that are transparent and open to the public. And I think going forward, getting to a point where performance measures are also tied to funding.
What about right now the economic impacts of the current sclerosis in the transportation system? That isn't really being talked about. And what I see are some studies, what it might look like in 10 years or 15 years if there's too much congestion, etc. Any sense about what the economic impact is right now? What we're losing?
Huge, immense. I mean,
it's a great question, and it's something we need to look at. And you know, when we think about performance metrics, so there's really two. So I said the first thing that we have to do as transportation agencies is serve our customers. So the vast majority of our customers drive. The majority of people who take public transportation to work every day drive. Own cars and drive, let alone the ones who don't own cars and drive, a growing group. So for transportation, for those who use public transportation, the sclerosis is that the average commute in Massachusetts is half an hour, except for the average commute for a public transportation rider is 45 minutes. So what we really need to do is get the system to work better so that it's actually more time efficient, or at least as time efficient to use public transportation as it is to drive. And a lot of that is operational, and some of that is capacity and other improvements. For drivers, the solution, and this is why we need to start measuring it so that we can figure out, is increasingly, I believe, going to be technology, right? It's not so much building roads, because it's not about money. It's actually where exactly are we adding, 2 extra lanes to our road system in Massachusetts? Which places have, just empty lands sitting by the sides of the roadsides. But, if you think about, those boards that tell you what time it is, and they started out on the highways, which is really useful so that when you're sitting in traffic, you know how long you'll be sitting in traffic. But, that system over the next year is going to be expanded substantially, and the data won't just be on the roads, the data will be on the approaches to roads, and most importantly, the data will be on an app. And so before you leave, you'll know what the real time is right now to take the turnpike from, 495 into the Austin tolls, and if that number's high, then you won't take that route, and, maybe you'll pull into a commuter rail station instead and hop on the train, and you'll know whether that train's on time. So technology, I think, is gonna, I'm not saying it's gonna end congestion, but a big way that people can deal with congestion is knowing where and when it is, and making choices to work their way around it, and we owe it to our customers to help them do it. Where there are real bottlenecks, we need to fix the real bottlenecks, but in many cases, our ability to do that fix is limited. But if we're not measuring commute time, if we're not measuring congestion on the transit system and on the roads, then any strategy, we don't know if it works. So absolutely, we are wasting time, we are wasting money, we are burning up gasoline that is increasing greenhouse gas emissions that we are trying to reduce. So we need to get better, but the first thing we need to do is just do some basic measurement, and then the second thing we need to do is give people great real-time information so they can make smarter transportation choices.
1 second, Rick. I just wanted to let people know that we're going to turn to you for questions. I'm assuming that there are probably no shortage of questions in the audience, so we'll do that in a minute. Go ahead, Rick.
Sure. So again, performance metrics are something that long overdue relative to our DOT, and they are getting some great attention right now. And I know we will establish them, and then to measure against them will be an awesome thing and something that we should have been doing some time ago. And that way we can actually think about the kinds of critical investments that Secretary Pollack has been talking about. In the meantime, there's some significant issues regarding transportation in our economy. This past winter, and the result of our system shutting down and then gradually coming back over 30 days, 45 days, et cetera, had a huge economic impact. We're talking millions and millions of dollars of lost economic dollars as a result of a transportation system that failed us.
It was over $1 billion.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to be kind.
No.
But it was a significant, we surveyed our members, and we didn't add up all the dollars, but the tremendous impact, obviously. So the notion of having a system, and then we saw what happens, by the way, when commuter rail isn't operating this past winter. And we saw what the highway congestion implications were when we don't have a functioning transit system. I'm talking about tremendous travel time losses. I'm talking about productivity losses as a result of not having commuter rail and parts of our transit system in place because people got in their car. So if you want to imagine what it's going to be like 20 years from now if we don't do anything to enhance the capacity of our system and try to find those incremental investments where expansion relative to return on investment is essential, you just experienced it last winter. Okay? And then think of what the economic implications are of that. So, and just finally, in South Boston, we just did a study. 67% more trips want to be there 20 years from now. There's another 17 million square feet of development that wants to take place there. When we did the analysis, 67% of those trips were put on transit. Why? Because the model, as Stephanie suggested, we aren't going to be expanding highways and bridges. We just need to fix them. We do need to use technology, but the model put those trips onto transit because they had no place else to go. But if you look at the transit system to support that 63% increase in transit use, it's not there. We need to figure out a way to incrementally expand our transit system to accommodate those kind of trips so the South Boston waterfront, which has been the strongest economic center in the state, can continue to be one of those globally competitive markets.
And just very briefly, I think the one area that sort of crystallizes where Rick and I see things differently is that I don't think you can say, given what we've seen over the last few years, that spending more money to expand a system that doesn't work does anything for the economy. The best thing we can do first, not the only thing we can do, the best thing we can do first to maximize the economic impact of the transportation system and to turn it into a system that, that facilitates economic growth rather than impeding it, is to create a system that is maintained and that is reliable and that gets you where you want to go before we talk about building new things that we cannot afford to build, or to maintain or operate, which will simply exacerbate the problem.
And I'm proud of the state, and I think we're a state that can walk and chew gum at the same time.
All right. Let's turn to the audience. Questions. Sir, in the middle. If you could speak. No, but if I'll try to repeat your question if people can hear it.
I have 2 points to the legal question. First point is, I think the focus on a framework that will allow the growth, the efficient growth of the system is very important. My analogy, I look at the internet where the government put a framework in place. The World Wide Web was developed, and then the browser came along that opened the thing up. And then you had this virtual server. We wouldn't think in terms of framework that way for the transportation system. Fantastic. The other point, in terms of thinking regionally, the discussion today is about the state. Consumers already think regionally about air transportation. We look at Manchester, Boston, and Bradley, Providence, in terms of choosing where we're going to travel. Will you address how we might think about transportation regionally and linked to a great recreation, jobs, residential opportunities? Beyond the state, really thinking regionally about New England in general.
You were out in Holyoke recently, right? With the train coming through.
That's in Massachusetts.
It is, but it's awfully close to other places, other states.
So, so this is where you get the professor's answers instead of the secretary's answers. So, transportation planning. So, first of all, as people have heard me say a million times, I'm going to say it again. There should be no such thing as transportation planning, right? Because in this phrase, transportation planning, we modify the word planning with transportation. We should plan. What do we want our economy to look like? Where do we want our homes to be? Where do we want our recreational opportunities to be? Then transportation serves our plans for the future. To do that, it has to function at 3 levels, right? First is in your community. In your community is your best shot at walking, biking, short transit trips, making communities. They're usually referred to as connected communities. So there are places you can get to. And that's going to be a partnership with the municipalities who control both the land use and all the Chapter 90 dollars to do that. The second thing is your community needs to be connected to the places where you cannot get the things that are in your community. For most people, their job is not going to be in their community. Where they go to school, for higher ed, not K through 12, is not in their community. And sort of tertiary health care, the big, expensive, important stuff, even if there is a nearby community hospital, it may not be in your community. So we need to connect places to each other. That's what the planning should be about. And then the third is intercity. How do you get beyond where you go to school, where you go to work, where you get your health care, and get farther afield that you might want to do? Those trips are less frequent. That doesn't make them less important. And so, Massachusetts apparently was not a big participant in the group of Northeast states that meet periodically. I've been to the first meeting, and I'm hoping to get to all of them. We have an intercity rail study going with Vermont and Connecticut, and we absolutely need to be doing, more of that. But it's not instead of, it's in addition to the planning for within communities and connecting people to their daily needs.
Sir.
Hi, Dan Gotti with Massachusetts League of Environmental Voters. Last week, I don't know if you all saw this, but Andrew Cuomo of New York suggested that the state of New York might be interested in joining California's cap-and-trade system. That's been a source of billions of dollars in funding for California. He also suggested maybe bringing other red states along in that. What do you guys think about maybe carbon pricing as a source of future revenue for transportation?
I think it's an excellent place to look at and explore, and that's why, I think it's worthwhile to at least put the notion of future funding, revenue, future investments on the table, because these things, as I said, take time. We did a little cap-and-trade stuff here in Massachusetts. Frankly, it didn't work out for us. I'm not sure if we did it right. I don't know enough about it, but I would like to learn more. And there, excuse me. There's other places, both here in the United States and globally, where it seems like it's been making some progress and has had some return. So I think that's a place that we should definitely be spending some time. The other thing is, too, I just want to mention, we know that Governor Baker and Secretary Pollack are going to spend the money that we have well, and I want to tie both your points together. The point about regionalism and transportation and connections, and your point about looking at climate change and carbon-related opportunities, that's also a national issue. We're asleep at the switch relative to our national transportation and environmental policy, and looking at how those things can come together to solve our problems. I mean, there was a colleague of mine in New York in the Regional Planning Association, Bob Yarrow, who was pushing high-speed rail in the Northeast Corridor. And if we had really high-speed rail in that corridor, the New Haven area of Connecticut could be the job shed of Boston. I mean, we are so underinvesting nationally relative to our economic centers and our rural areas and suburban areas, and we are so not looking at the opportunities to tie climate change and environmental strategy with real revenue sources and infrastructure development. I want us to have that conversation, obviously, in Massachusetts, and I think we're doing some incredible things here. In many ways, we're far ahead, absolutely ahead of the conversation going on nationally. But I just want to remind people that that's not a bad place to encourage our, the national conversation as well.
Sir?
Yes, it seems that over the years we've heard about different economic news that seems to happen. We speak in terms of the public being excited for a project or something like that. When it comes to certain ways of being regulated, for instance, let's say there's a law in a petition of a different arrangement is on the way to arms. And they make more of a Jewish student.
First of all, I would be on if the Secretary spoke.
So those who know me know that I am a huge data geek. And, there's this facile expression that people say, which is, if you don't measure it, it doesn't count. In transportation, we measure all the wrong things. I have no idea how many people from out of state are driving on our roads or how many miles they're doing. I have no idea what percentage of fares on the T are not paid, because to know that, you have to know how many people are riding every day on commuter rail, and then how much revenue we collect. We don't know that. We have conductors who kind of eyeball it. There's so many important things that we don't know about the relationship of transportation to the economy or our own system. And so it becomes very hard to sort of think outside the box and say, what if we did this? What if we did these other things? We need to move in that direction. And, one of the things that we don't talk about when we talk, like I said, we've been doing this for 40 years. We're always chasing the next big project in Massachusetts. The next big project may actually just be collecting data, analyzing it, and having the best IT transportation system in the country, so that we can figure out all these things, so that we can then solve the problems we have. We have, I think it's 26 different IT systems that feed into the Highway Operations Center in South Boston, and there are literally people who are sitting there trying to look at multiple screens and figure out what's going on statewide. And again, along with the state of good repair backlog and everything else, these are the kinds of things that when people say, what do you want the system to look like in 25 years? I want it to look like an integrated, customer-friendly system, but I also want it to look like a system that is commensurate with what technology in 2040 allows us to do. So you raise good points, and one of the reasons that people raise these and we never act on them is we don't count the things that would help us better understand how our transportation system relates to things like out-of-state drivers or fare evasion or all of these other kinds of ideas. And that's an investment that we need to start making, even though the return may not come for years down the road. Your information, if you are a licensed driver or you have registered a car in Massachusetts, you should be delighted to know that that information sits in a mainframe programmed in COBOL at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, okay, in the capital of the innovation economy. And so while no one can get very excited, I am very excited that we have an RFI out to fix that system, and we're going to do a giant data cleaning project, because we have 3 times as many entries in that COBOL mainframe database as there are cars registered in Massachusetts. So we have a lot of groundwork to do that I truly believe will then create a foundation so that we can do way smarter things in the future. There's no shortage of smarts and innovation in Massachusetts. It just hasn't penetrated the transportation system very deeply. We need to change that.
Yeah, I would just add that we don't know exactly how it will fit in, but I do think certainly that things like distance pricing and congestion pricing and different prices during different times of day are, I think, clearly going to be part of the answer at the T.
Yeah, and one thing, actually, to go back to that issue, because we have a group right now working on fare policy and a group working on service delivery policy. When the decision was made to put in the Charlie card system, the decision was made not to have you go through a fare gate on your way out, which is why we can't do distance-based pricing like Washington does. That system, the hardware and software in that system, is a decade or less away from needing to be replaced. But again, how are we going to pay for things in the year 2025 or 2030? I don't know if we want fare gates. I don't know if we don't want the equivalent of the gantries that we're going to put in on the Mass Turnpike, and you'll just walk underneath it and it'll talk to something in your wallet, maybe the wallet itself, maybe your phone, maybe a chip, I don't know. And then if we have that system, then it would be pretty easy to have both when you walk in and when you walk out. And so I want to make sure we don't do what we did the first time, which is sort of spec a system based on our understanding of what technology exists, but that we ask questions about, by the time we could possibly procure, pay for, and put in that new system, will it really be state of the art, and will it give us the latitude to have an integrated system? I don't understand why I shouldn't be able to pay a toll, a parking charge, and public transportation, not just on the T, but on all of our regional transit authorities with one form of payment. The problem is, I don't know what that form of payment is going to be in 10 years.
Why can't you pay for parking at Logan with the same card you get on the T with?
Oh, you don't even want to begin. Why can't you pay for it with your fast lane transit?
Just a quick point, George. The other thing that's
Question
really
in the back. We have time. I'm sorry. We have 2 minutes. I promised we'd conclude around in a couple minutes, so we have time for one more question. Sorry, Rick.
no problem.
Go ahead.
So we're preparing for as much snow as we got last winter and praying that it won't happen. No. Well, yeah, I am personally. So I think there are 2 things that we owe our customers. The first is the ability to operate whenever it is safe to operate. So that doesn't mean no shutdowns. We had a travel ban during one of the blizzards. We had 110 inches of snow last winter with no fatalities or serious injuries due to the transportation system. To me, that was the most important fact about last winter, right? Safety comes first. So the first thing is that the system needs to work, and we should only shut it down because there's a safety issue, not because we can't run it and we've let it ice up and all the things that happen. And that's why we're inconveniencing everybody on the red and orange line right now. We have literally bought, my understanding is, all of the third rail that is available for purchase. And so we will not replace all of it because we can't buy enough to replace all of it. We'll finish the rest next year. So there's a very detailed plan in place for both the commuter rail and the T, with the goal of being open unless we have to shut for safety reasons. And the second thing that we owe our customers that we really did not do well last winter and that we are still working on is when there are changes in the availability of transportation, and this should be true on our highways and on the commuter rail and on the Core T system, we owe you real-time information so you can at least plan your day and your week. And we did a terrible job of that last winter. And so to the extent that things are going to have to close for safety or other reasons, or be delayed or be canceled, we need to have a better real-time communication system for getting that information out to people. So those are really the two things that we're working really hard on delivering.
So, and I get to watch while all that amazing stuff is going on to prepare for this winter, which, you know, frankly is happening. But on the other side, I just want to make sure that we let the public know that they also have responsibility too. For example, major employers are making changes in how they deal with severe storms, and they need to do things like figure out ways to have more people work from home. So I just wanted to offer that because we have major employers that are board members of mine that are actually building the computer capacity. Then in the event where there's a safety issue and the system can't accommodate trips, that we can use technology to make sure that we're still being productive and doing it effectively. So that it's got to be a partnership. The system really didn't meet our expectations last year. A lot of challenges, as the Secretary suggested, but we all need to be ready for those types of circumstances, and that's got to be a partnership.
Okay, with that, thank you. Christina Egan, Transportation for Massachusetts, thank you for your support. Russell, thank you so much. And please join me in thanking our terrific panel. Yeah, thank you. That was fun. Thanks so much. It was really great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it very much.
Nice and moderated.